vicious, armed with a net and trident. Each role demands perfection. One misstep in the arena, and you're dead before the crowd can even gasp. Sweat soaks the sand. The sun. Before man, before cities, before even the first bird.
Dinosaurs once ruled the world.
They called her a widow.
They don't.
Every morning, a man and his dog.
The Wild West wasn't built.
On the morning of August 6th.
In the final days of World War II.
Once upon a time in old. Throughout history, war has taken many. In the beginning, there were no. The American Civil War. A brutal conflict that shaped the soul of a nation. This is the story of how the United States of America tore itself apart, and what it took to stitch itself back together. It is a war still misunderstood, still debated, and still alive in the conscience of a country it nearly destroyed. This war was not inevitable, but it was years in the making. It was not simply North against South. It was economy against economy, future against past, and freedom against bondage. Slavery had become the spine of the Southern economy. It was embedded in every law, every institution. Millions of black men, women, and children were considered property. They had no rights, no voice, no protection. Meanwhile, the North was changing rapidly. Factories were rising. Immigrants were pouring in. Cities were growing. There were still racists in the North. But the North did not depend on slavery to survive. And more people were calling for its end. Laws tried to calm the storm. The Missouri Compromise admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as free. The Compromise of 1850 included the Fugitive Slave Act, angering many in the North. The Kansas-Nebraska Act opened new lands to slavery by popular vote. Bleeding Kansas erupted in violence. It became clear. Compromise was failing. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision declared that no black person could ever be a citizen. That decision struck like thunder. It confirmed to millions that the system was deeply corrupted. Then came John Brown, an abolitionist who believed slavery would only end through bloodshed. In 1859, he led a raid on a federal armory at Harper's Ferry. He wanted to spark a slave revolt. He failed and was executed. But in death, he became a symbol. A martyr to abolitionists, a terrorist to the South. The election of 1860 was the final fracture. Abraham Lincoln won the presidency without carrying a single Southern state. The South panicked. They believed Lincoln would abolish slavery outright. South Carolina was the first to leave the Union. 10 more states followed. In early 1861, they formed the Confederate States of America. They elected Jefferson Davis as their president, and they began seizing federal property within their borders. Then came Fort Sumter, a Union fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. Confederate forces surrounded it and demanded surrender. When the Union refused, they opened fire. The American Civil War had begun. Many believed the war would last weeks. Instead, it lasted 4 years. It became a grinding, bitter, and costly struggle. At the First Battle of Bull Run, Union troops panicked and fled. It was a wake-up call. The South would not be easily defeated. At Antietam, over 23,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing in a single day. It remains the bloodiest day in American history. The dead lay in rows, unburied, untouched. The scale of death was staggering. Gettysburg saw 3 days of fighting and over 50,000 casualties. It marked the high water mark of the Confederacy. After Gettysburg, the South would never again launch a major offensive in the North. In the West, Union forces captured New Orleans and took control of the Mississippi River. General Ulysses S. Grant laid siege to Vicksburg and starved the city into surrender. This cut the Confederacy in half. General William Tecumseh Sherman then began his march to the sea. He destroyed railroads, burned crops, and tore through Georgia. He practiced total war, aiming to break the South's ability and will to fight. Meanwhile, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all enslaved people in Confederate states were free. It did not immediately end slavery, but it changed the purpose of the war. Now the Union fought not only for survival, but for freedom. Black men rushed to enlist. Over 180,000 served in the Union Army. They fought with courage. They faced death not only from bullets, but from execution or re-enslavement if captured. Yet they fought. For their people, for dignity, for the future. The Confederacy hoped for help from Europe. They believed cotton would bring them allies. But after the Emancipation Proclamation, Britain and France stepped back. They would not support a war for slavery. The war continued to drag on. The South's resources dried up. Its men were exhausted. Grant pushed forward with relentless pressure. He understood that victory would come not just through strategy, but through attrition. In 1865, Union forces captured Richmond, the Confederate capital. Robert E. Lee tried to escape west, but his army was surrounded. On April 9, 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse, he surrendered to Grant. Just 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, shot in the back of the head at Ford's Theater. He did not live to see the peace he had fought for. The South lay in ruins. Cities were burned. Fields left fallow. Millions of people were dead, wounded, orphaned, or traumatized. Slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment. But freedom did not bring equality. Racism remained deeply rooted. Reconstruction began, but it was slow, violent, and fiercely resisted. 1 in every 4 Southern white men of military age had died. Entire communities were wiped out. Tens of thousands of men returned home with missing limbs. Many were never whole again, in body or mind. And the country remained deeply divided. The American Civil War ended on paper, but its consequences are still unfolding. This war forced America to reckon with its original sin. It tore off the mask. It exposed every contradiction. And it demanded that the country choose what it truly believed in. The cost was staggering. But the future was bought with that price. Not all battles are fought with guns, and not all wounds are visible. This was the war that forged modern America, and the memory of it must never fade. Please like, share, and subscribe if you believe in telling the truth behind history. This is the American Civil War, and this is the story that must be remembered. The American Civil War wasn't just brother against brother. It was the American Civil War. In the beginning, there were no borders.
More than sport.
Throughout history, war has taken many forms. But perhaps no kind of battle tests the human spirit more than a siege. Trapped within walls, cut off from food, hope, and reinforcements. A siege is not just a battle of weapons, it is a battle of patience, fear, and survival. These are the greatest sieges in history. The Siege of Troy, the Greeks versus the Trojans. It began with the abduction of Helen, and it lasted 10 years. The Greeks laid siege to Troy in a campaign filled with duels, deception, and death. Legends say it ended with the famous Trojan horse, a gift left at the city gates, hiding Greek soldiers within. When night fell, Troy was betrayed from the inside and burned to the ground. The Siege of Babylon, the Persians versus the Babylonians. Cyrus the Great of Persia faced one of the most fortified cities in the world. Babylon's walls were tall, wide, and guarded by the Euphrates River. But Cyrus diverted the river and marched his army through the dry bed at night. The city fell without a fight. It was one of the most brilliant siege tactics in ancient history. The Siege of Syracuse, the Greeks and Carthage combined versus the Roman Republic. During the Second Punic War, the Roman Republic attacked the Greek city of Syracuse. But the defenders had a secret weapon, Archimedes. The great inventor created catapults, mirrors, and defensive machines to hold off the Romans for nearly 2 years. Eventually, the city fell, and Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier, despite orders to keep him alive. The Siege of Masada, Zealots versus the Roman Empire. In the deserts of Judea, a group of Jewish rebels held out against the Roman Empire atop a desert plateau. The Romans built a massive ramp over months to breach the fortress. But when they arrived, they found silence. Nearly 1,000 defenders had taken their own lives rather than be captured. It remains one of the most haunting sieges in history. The Siege of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire versus Persians. The capital of the Byzantine Empire was tested more than once. In 717, it held firm against Arab forces. But in 1453, it faced the full force of the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Mehmed II brought cannons, including the massive bombard that shattered the Theodosian walls. After 53 days, Constantinople fell. The city became Istanbul, and the medieval era came to an end. The Siege of Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs versus the Spanish conquistadors. In the heart of modern-day Mexico, Hernán Cortés led Spanish forces against the Aztec capital. With the help of native allies and aided by disease, the Spanish laid siege to the island city. The canals turned red. Famine and smallpox ravaged the defenders. After 93 days, the Aztec Empire collapsed. The Siege of Vienna, Austrians versus the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire reached the gates of Europe's core. Vienna was surrounded. But a massive relief force led by Polish King Jan Sobieski launched the largest cavalry charge in history. The siege was broken. It marked the high water mark of Ottoman expansion into Europe. The Siege of Leningrad, Nazi Germany versus the Russians. Nazi Germany surrounded the Soviet city of Leningrad for nearly 900 days. In the freezing cold, over 1 million civilians died from starvation, shelling, and disease. Yet the city never surrendered. It was one of the longest and most tragic sieges in modern warfare. The Siege of Stalingrad, Nazi Germany versus Russians. Stalingrad wasn't a siege by walls, but by sheer destruction. Germany's Sixth Army pushed deep into the Soviet Union, but Soviet forces refused to break. Urban warfare took over, room by room, floor by floor. Eventually, Germany's army was surrounded and forced to surrender. It was the turning point of World War II, the Siege of Dien Bien Phu, Vietnamese versus the French. In the jungles of Vietnam, French forces set up a base at Dien Bien Phu. They believed they were safe, but the Viet Minh surrounded them in the hills and brought in heavy artillery. After 57 days, the French surrendered. It marked the end of French colonial rule in Indochina and the rise of the Vietnam War. The Siege of Sarajevo, Bosnia Civil War. In the Bosnian War, the capital city of Sarajevo was trapped for almost 4 years. Snipers targeted civilians. Artillery rained down on homes, schools, and hospitals. More than 10,000 people died, many of them children. It was the longest siege of a capital city in modern warfare. Sieges are not always won by force. Sometimes they are won by will, by the refusal to surrender, by hope that holds out even when the walls begin to crumble. From ancient stone cities to modern skylines, sieges have shaped the course of human history. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this. Subscribe to see future content. Sharing is caring.
Close your eyes.
Once upon a time in old Europe, people started dying mysteriously and in large numbers, and the explanation, according to many, was not disease or bad sanitation. It was vampires. Yes, vampires. Dead people rising from the grave, sneaking into homes and draining the life from their neighbors. This wasn't just folklore whispered around campfires. Entire villages believed it. So did nobles, priests, and even doctors. The symptoms they saw: pale skin, weight loss, coughing up blood. Today we call that tuberculosis. Back then it was textbook vampire behavior. So what did they do about it? They grabbed shovels, marched to the graveyards, and started digging people up. Once they opened a coffin, the body was judged on appearance. If it wasn't decomposing fast enough, that meant it was undead. Sometimes the stomach was bloated or there was blood at the mouth. Instead of realizing that these were normal signs of decomposition, they assumed the corpse had been feeding. So they acted. They removed hearts, cut off heads, drove stakes through chests, shoved garlic in mouths, and occasionally they poured boiling wine over the body for good measure. Because clearly vampires hate hot drinks. In some cases they ground up the heart into ashes and made the family drink it. Because if grandma's dying, the logical solution is to make her sip vampire dust. Medical science was still on vacation. One of the most famous cases happened in 1725 in Serbia. A man named Petar Blagojevich died, and soon after, 9 others followed. Locals said Petar had returned from the dead and attacked them. When they opened his grave, they claimed he looked too fresh and had blood on his lips. So they staked him and burned the body. The story spread across Europe, causing full-on vampire hysteria. Even the church stepped in, not because of the grave digging, but because vampires didn't fit the religious narrative. The church believed the dead should stay dead or wait peacefully for resurrection. Rising from the grave to bite your cousin didn't fit the theology. Eventually, science caught up. Doctors realized that tuberculosis, decomposition, and poor hygiene were to blame, not the undead. But by then, the vampire myth had taken hold. In 1897, Bram Stoker published Dracula and changed everything. Now, vampires had class. They wore capes, lived in castles, and made being undead look kind of cool. Fast forward to today. Vampires star in movies, TV shows, novels, video games, and Halloween costumes. They sparkle, smolder, and occasionally sell car insurance. But the truth behind their origin, it's a panic that came from fear, misunderstanding, and a complete lack of germ theory. So are vampires real? No. But the panic was. The superstition was. People truly believe this stuff. And that belief shaped part of our history. If you enjoyed this, hit like. Subscribe to see future videos. And share to support the channel. Because knowing things is power.
In the final days of World War II, as the world burned and then began to rebuild, one man remained hidden in the shadows of the Philippine jungle, a soldier who refused to surrender because in his heart the war was not over. His name was Hiru Onoda. A lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Army, trained in intelligence and survival, he was ordered to hold his ground on Lubang Island, no matter how long it took. Retreat was not an option. Surrender was forbidden. Death was preferable to dishonor. When the war officially ended in 1945, millions celebrated peace. But Onoda never got the message. Leaflets were dropped. Loudspeakers called out. Newspapers were left behind.